Solomon, the third king of Israel, marked his era with wisdom and grandeur. As the son of David and Bathsheba, he was not the only contender for the throne, as Israel already had other strong and influential heirs. The succession was tense, with ongoing internal disputes for leadership. Despite this, God himself chose Solomon to inherit the throne of Israel, a clear sign that something special was in store for him. The influence of his mother, Bathsheba, was crucial in Solomon's rise. Along with the prophet Nathan, she orchestrated a plan to ensure her son would succeed David. At a time when others sought to secure power, Nathan and Bathsheba's intervention proved pivotal. This alliance, along with divine support, paved the way for Solomon to become king, solidifying his position and authority. As king, Solomon quickly showed his potential, though the responsibility upon him was immense. Israel awaited a strong and wise leader, and Solomon needed to prove worthy of God's choice and the people's support. Upon taking the throne, he understood that his youth and inexperience could be obstacles. The pressure was high, but Solomon was determined to be a king who would bring honor to the name of his father and his God. Thus began Solomon's journey, a path marked by moments of glory and spiritual challenges. He would be remembered for his wisdom, wealth, and the grandeur of his reign, but also for his mistakes and a spiritual distancing that would bring serious consequences. Solomon's story is one of the most complex in the Bible, revealing the power and challenges of leading with wisdom and faith. From a young age, Solomon observed his father David's reign, learning valuable lessons on leadership and justice. He witnessed the victories and challenges David faced in unifying Israel and maintaining peace. Young Solomon understood that being a leader required more than physical strength. It required a deep connection with God and a commitment to justice. He knew that to govern Israel, he would need to absorb everything his father taught him. David, in turn, knew his son would need constant guidance. As an experienced warrior and a man after God's own heart, David imparted to Solomon the principles he deemed fundamental for a good reign. Their relationship was marked by mutual trust and admiration. Solomon saw David as a model of a God-fearing leader, someone who, despite his failings, always sought reconciliation and divine guidance. Alongside David, Solomon witnessed the importance of alliances and faith. David himself faced challenges and betrayals during his reign, and Solomon learned that a leader must always be vigilant. He understood that Israel was a unique nation, led by God, and that leadership required not only administrative skills but also constant submission to the Lord. These teachings shaped Solomon's vision and strengthened his faith in God. This early formation prepared Solomon for the challenges to come. He knew that as king, he would need to balance power with compassion, strength with wisdom, and authority with faith. Solomon's leadership journey began with the preparation he received from David, which would help him lead Israel into one of the most prosperous periods in its history and provide a foundation to face temptations and future challenges. When Solomon took the throne of Israel, he was young and inexperienced, and the great responsibility of governing a nation led him to seek a deeper connection with God. One night, God appeared to him in a dream and offered him a rare and powerful opportunity. Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Faced with this proposal, Solomon had to reflect on what truly mattered in his journey as king. He could have asked for wealth, long life, or the defeat of his enemies, but he chose something far more valuable. In an act of humility and discernment, Solomon asked God for wisdom to govern the people with justice and righteousness. He prayed, "Give me a discerning heart to judge your people, to distinguish between right and wrong." By making this request, Solomon showed his understanding that governing was not only a privilege, but a sacred responsibility. He knew that without divine guidance, his youth and inexperience could harm the kingdom. God was deeply pleased with Solomon's request, as he sought wisdom above all. As a reward, God not only granted him unparalleled wisdom, but also promised him riches, honor, and a long life as long as he remained faithful. This moment became a cornerstone of Solomon's reign, as the wisdom given by God would be the foundation of his rule and set him apart from all other kings. From that moment, Solomon began to stand out as a remarkable ruler, making decisions that would soon show his ability to discern and his commitment to justice. His request for wisdom was not only a wise decision, but also a reflection of his humility and desire to be a leader after God's own heart. This event marked the beginning of a prosperous era for Israel and would shape Solomon's image for future generations. Shortly after receiving divine wisdom, Solomon had the opportunity to apply it in a delicate situation that would define his reputation as a judge. Two women came to him, both claiming to be the mother of a baby. Each woman presented a different account, and there were no witnesses or evidence to determine who the true mother was. It was a complex situation, as Solomon's decision would not only determine custody of the child, but also demonstrate his ability to judge justly. In a surprising act, Solomon suggested that the child be cut in half, offering half to each woman. This proposal, seemingly cruel, was a strategy to reveal the true mother, who immediately pleaded for the baby to be given to the other woman to preserve his life. In contrast, the other woman agreed to the division, showing her lack of attachment and feeling for the child. By observing their reactions, Solomon instantly identified the true mother and declared that the baby should be given to her. This judgment became known as one of the most notable examples of practical wisdom and discernment. News of this judgment quickly spread, and the people of Israel came to see Solomon as a just and wise king, capable of making complex decisions and discerning people's hearts. This emblematic story not only solidified Solomon's fame, but also served as a reminder of the origin of his wisdom, a divine gift. Solomon would continue to judge the people with the same discernment and compassion, and this episode showed that he possessed not only power, but also the humility necessary to govern with justice. Thus, his reputation as a wise king grew, and Israel experienced a period of peace and prosperity. One of the greatest projects of Solomon's reign was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a long-standing dream of the people of Israel and of his father, King David. David had desired to build a permanent house for the Ark of the Covenant, but God instructed him to leave this task to his son. Thus, Solomon inherited this sacred mission, knowing that the temple would be more than a building. It would represent God's presence among his people and serve as the spiritual center of Israel. The construction of the temple was a grand work and required meticulous preparation. Solomon mobilized thousands of workers and resources from various parts of the kingdom and neighboring nations. He formed an alliance with Hiram, king of Tyre, to obtain cedar and cypress from Lebanon, as well as skilled craftsmen. Precious stones, gold, and silver were brought in to adorn the temple, and nothing was spared to make it worthy of God. Every detail was carefully planned, and the collective effort demonstrated Israel's devotion to this sacred task. The Temple of Solomon was impressive in its architecture and symbolism. Its columns, named Jachin and Boaz, represented Israel's stability and strength. The temple's interior was richly decorated, with figures of cherubim and other sacred images carved in wood and covered in gold. In the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple, the Ark of the Covenant was placed, containing the tablets of the law. This was where God manifested himself, and only the high priest could enter once a year to intercede for the people. After 7 years of work, the temple was completed. Solomon gathered all the people of Israel for a dedication ceremony, offering sacrifices and prayers to God. He pleaded with the Lord to look upon his people with mercy and hear their prayers when they turned to the temple. At that moment, a cloud symbolizing God's glory filled the temple, confirming that God had accepted Solomon's offering and was present among his people. The construction of the temple became the crowning achievement of Solomon's reign, establishing Israel as the chosen and faithful nation of its creator. Solomon's reign was a period of unprecedented abundance and prosperity in Israel. Thanks to the trade alliances he formed with neighboring kingdoms, Solomon transformed Israel into a prosperous economic center. Camel caravans transported spices, gold, and textiles from distant regions, and merchants brought valuable goods to Jerusalem. The royal treasury grew rapidly, and the kingdom was filled with wealth and resources, providing the people with an era of peace and stability. Solomon's kingdom was not only rich in material terms, but also in culture and innovation. With abundant resources, Solomon invested in architectural and infrastructure projects that strengthened Israel as a respected power. Besides the temple, Solomon built palaces, fortresses, and fortified cities in strategic locations, ensuring defense and control of trade routes. These imposing constructions represented Israel's glory and power and reflected the king's wisdom in ensuring his people's security and well-being. The visit of the Queen of Sheba is one of the most emblematic moments demonstrating Solomon's fame and influence. She traveled from afar with a retinue loaded with gifts, including gold and precious stones, to confirm the stories about his wealth and wisdom. Witnessing the grandeur of Israel and Solomon's wisdom, the queen was amazed and recognized that even half of the king's glory had not been told. The visit of the Queen of Sheba confirmed Solomon's position as a respected and admired figure, both in Israel and beyond its borders. However, with such wealth and power, Solomon also faced challenges. He accumulated chariots and horses, multiplied his possessions, and formed many alliances through marriages with foreign princesses. Although his wealth was a blessing, the Bible warns of the danger of excessive reliance on material wealth. The kingdom's prosperity brought immediate benefits to Israel, but also initiated a process of spiritual weakening that would exact a high price in the future. Thus, Solomon's wealth served both as a symbol of blessing and a warning about the dangers of pride and estrangement from God. Solomon's fame extended beyond the borders of Israel, reaching even the distant kingdom of Sheba in southern Arabia. Curious to verify the stories of his wisdom and wealth, the Queen of Sheba organized a caravan filled with gifts and riches. The journey was long and arduous, but she was determined to see, with her own eyes, the man who had become known as the wisest of kings. The arrival of the Queen of Sheba in Jerusalem was a memorable event, marking the meeting of two of the greatest figures of their time. Upon meeting Solomon, the Queen of Sheba tested his wisdom with challenging questions, seeking to verify if he was truly as wise as they said. She questioned him on various topics: politics, philosophy, theology, and even practical life matters. Solomon, with calm and composure, answered each question with depth and precision. The queen was deeply impressed to see that his wisdom was not only theoretical, but practical, reflecting a mind that comprehended both divine mysteries and earthly matters. During her stay, the Queen of Sheba had the opportunity to learn about the workings of the Kingdom of Israel. She observed the organization of the court, the kingdom's administration, and the grandeur of the temple Solomon had built. She was amazed at the prosperity and peace that reigned in Israel and saw that the people lived in harmony and security under Solomon's rule. Witnessing all this, the queen declared that not even half of Solomon's wisdom and wealth had been told. Her admiration was so great that she blessed the God of Israel, recognizing that Solomon's glory was a divine blessing. The visit of the Queen of Sheba was more than a meeting of kingdoms. It was an international acknowledgement of Solomon's just and wise rule. Besides the gifts and exchange of riches, the encounter symbolized an alliance of mutual respect and admiration between Israel and Sheba. The queen returned to her land with not only treasures, but also the inspiration of a reign that reflected divine wisdom. This episode immortalized Solomon's reputation as a king whose name and glory transcended Israel's borders and remained in the memory of generations. Solomon's personal life, especially his marital alliances, is an intriguing and complex aspect of his reign. In addition to being a powerful and wise king, Solomon formed many political alliances through marriages with foreign princesses. The king accumulated about 700 wives and 300 concubines from various nations, such as Egypt, Moab, Ammon, Edom, and Sidon. These marriages had a strategic purpose, strengthening ties with neighboring kingdoms and ensuring peace and stability for Israel. However, the large number of wives would become a spiritual and moral challenge for Solomon. These foreign wives brought their cultures and beliefs into Israel, including the worship of pagan gods. Despite having received clear instructions from God about the importance of remaining faithful and avoiding idols, Solomon allowed himself to be influenced by these foreign practices. Gradually, Solomon's faith in God began to weaken, and he began to build altars and places of worship for these gods, accommodating his wives' requests. This act of spiritual infidelity had serious consequences, as he ended up turning his heart away from the Lord and compromising his covenant with God. Solomon's spiritual distance marked a point of decline in his reign. God had blessed him with wisdom and wealth, but he allowed his desire to please his wives and to strengthen political alliances to stray from his commitment to God. By building altars for other gods, Solomon not only disobeyed God, but also set a negative example for the people of Israel. The nation that once exclusively worshipped the God of Israel began to be influenced by pagan cults and practices that compromised its spiritual identity. This departure from God was one of the most tragic aspects of Solomon's life. Although he was a wise and powerful king, his personal life showed the human weaknesses that even the most blessed face. Solomon teaches us that wisdom and wealth do not guarantee faithfulness, and that when we deviate from our values and faith, the consequences are inevitable. His example is a warning about the importance of standing firm in principles and faith, even in the face of temptations and external influences. In the end, Solomon's spiritual legacy was marred by his personal choices, and his story is remembered for both his great deeds and his errors. As the years passed, King Solomon began to drift away from the God who had blessed him with wisdom and prosperity. His many marriages with women from other nations brought foreign religious practices into his kingdom, which ultimately led him astray. Instead of resisting the pressures, Solomon gave in and allowed his wives to worship pagan gods within Israel, even to the point of building altars and temples for these deities. This act was one of the greatest deviations from his commitment to God and marked the beginning of a spiritual decline in his life. Solomon's drift from God was gradual but profound. He, who had received divine wisdom to govern with justice, began to ignore the laws and precepts that God had established for Israel. The Bible records that Solomon became involved in the worship of gods like Ashtoreth, Milcom, and Chemosh, pagan deities that were forbidden by the Lord. This involvement showed that Solomon not only allowed sin into his life, but also negatively influenced the people of Israel, who began to follow his example. Despite his deviations, God, in his mercy, warned Solomon about the consequences of his actions. God reminded him of the covenant made with David and urged him to abandon the idols and return to the path of faith. However, Solomon did not heed these warnings and continued to act according to his wife's desires and his own heart, disregarding God's commandments. Solomon's attitude displeased God, who, in response, announced that the kingdom of Israel would be divided after his death as a consequence of his unfaithfulness. This spiritual decline is one of the most tragic aspects of Solomon's life. He who began his reign with a close relationship with God allowed his heart to be corrupted by temptations and external influences. Solomon's story serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of pride, complacency, and abandoning faith. His life shows that, without spiritual vigilance, even the wisest can stray from the path. Solomon left a legacy of wisdom, but also of regret, as at the end of his life, he understood the consequences of his choices and the cost of straying from God. Solomon is traditionally recognized as the author of some of the Bible's most profound and inspiring books: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. These texts reflect the wisdom God granted him and offer teachings that go beyond his time. Proverbs, in particular, is a collection of practical advice for everyday life, addressing topics such as honesty, work, discipline, and fear of God. Solomon's words in these texts show the value of prudence and wisdom as guides for an integral and harmonious life. The book of Proverbs offers a pragmatic and spiritual view of the world. It teaches us that true wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, a central message throughout the Bible. Each proverb contains a valuable lesson, whether about relationships, ethics, or the importance of cultivating virtues. Solomon wrote about the need to avoid pride and arrogance, something he would experience later in his life. His advice is timeless and continues to be a source of spiritual and moral guidance for millions of people around the world. Another book attributed to Solomon is Ecclesiastes, where he adopts a more introspective and philosophical approach. In this text, Solomon reflects on life's ephemeral nature, stating that everything is vanity. He questions the meaning of existence, wealth, and pleasure, concluding that everything is fleeting and empty without God's presence. In Ecclesiastes, we see an older Solomon, aware of the mistakes he made, who realized that true satisfaction cannot be found in material things, but only in a life lived with purpose and reverence to God. Finally, the Song of Songs, also attributed to Solomon, celebrates love and union. This lyrical poem reflects a different side of the king, the ability to love deeply and express that feeling intensely. Together, these books reveal a complete portrait of Solomon, a man of great wisdom, but also of profound reflection and repentance. His words, inspired by God, continue to be a source of wisdom and spiritual learning, showing that, despite his mistakes, he still had much to teach the world about the value of faith and humility. In the last years of his life, Solomon experienced the weight of his choices and the impact of his estrangement from God. The king who began his reign with genuine devotion and a close relationship with the Lord now perceived the consequences of allowing idolatry and pride into his heart. Though he had built a magnificent temple for God, Solomon also built altars for other gods, dishonoring the covenant made with the Lord. This period of his life was marked by reflection and repentance. At the end of his life, Solomon understood that all the wisdom, wealth, and power he possessed were not enough to fill the void caused by his estrangement from God. He realized that true happiness and satisfaction lay in obedience and faithfulness to the Creator. Many scholars believe that his words in Ecclesiastes, where he states that all is vanity, reflect his acknowledgement that he sought meaning in the wrong things. His final recorded words emphasize the importance of fearing God and obeying his commandments, advice he wished he had followed more closely. The impact of Solomon's choices did not remain confined to his personal life. It also affected the entire nation of Israel. After his death, the kingdom he had governed with so much glory and prosperity was divided into two: Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This schism was a direct consequence of the idolatry and estrangement from God that marked Solomon's later years. The division brought conflict, instability, and eventually led both kingdoms into exile. Solomon's legacy is thus a mixture of greatness and tragedy, showing how even the greatest leaders are subject to the consequences of their actions. Despite his errors and spiritual decline, Solomon left a legacy of wisdom through his writings and teachings. His proverbs, reflections, and teachings on human nature and fear of God remain a source of inspiration and learning. He reminds us that no matter how blessed a leader may be, constant humility and faithfulness are necessary to remain close to God. Solomon's life, with all its achievements and failings, is a testament to the power of divine wisdom, but also a warning about the dangers of straying from God's ways. Solomon's life offers powerful lessons that remain relevant today, especially for those seeking wisdom, success, and a meaningful life. One of the first lessons is about the value of fearing God as the true foundation of wisdom. When Solomon asked for wisdom to govern the people of Israel, he demonstrated humility and deep respect for God, acknowledging that without him, it would be impossible to lead with justice. This request teaches us that true wisdom begins with humility and dependence on something greater than ourselves, a truth that transcends generations. Another important lesson is about the dangers of negative influences and spiritual estrangement. Although Solomon began with a heart faithful to God, he allowed power, wealth, and alliances with foreign nations to lead him away from his initial purpose. This gradual shift warns us of the danger of compromising our values and yielding to external pressures. Solomon reminds us that when we stray from our principles and faith, we can lose our direction and eventually face the consequences of our choices. Solomon's journey also emphasizes the futility of seeking satisfaction in material things. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon reflects on his experiences and concludes that all is vanity, a profoundly meaningful message for a society that often values wealth and status. He teaches us that true contentment is not found in possessions, but in a sincere relationship with God and the simplicity of living according to his principles. This lesson remains relevant, reminding us that lasting happiness is not in external achievements, but in inner peace. Finally, Solomon's life shows the importance of remaining vigilant in our faith and spiritual commitments. He, who was considered the wisest of kings, was also susceptible to human weaknesses, and his story serves as a warning for us all. Wisdom is a precious gift, but without the practice of faithfulness and humility, even the wisest can lose their way. May Solomon's life inspire each of us to seek true wisdom, to value our faith, and to live with integrity, always remembering that, in the end, what truly matters is our relationship with God and the spiritual legacy we leave behind.